Oh my goodness, folks. Happy Friday. Welcome to Friday. It's finally Friday. We have made it to the end of the week. Now let's just take on this day. Let's slay this day. Let's get it going so we can get it done and get to the weekend. How about that? So this is Michael, by the way, if you didn't know, on the graveyard shift in the wee hours of the night with your daily trivia question yet once again to get your brand new day started. The answer to the previous trivia question was none other than the railroad industry. This was kind of a tricky question. It was 1950, and the trivia question was what mode of transportation? Okay, so there was many available at this time when Truman took over because of strikes. But the answer was the railroad industry. So in the very latter part of the 1940s, the railroad industry was engaged in a long-standing dispute between unions and rail companies over a number of things: wage demands, work rules, proposed changes to try and resolve those disputes. They were all designed for solution, however, to no avail. President Truman had already tried to take the initiative by creating an emergency board so negotiation of some sort could be reached. These efforts did not work, and a long-term walkout seemed imminent to Truman and, quite frankly, the rest of the country. So enter in 1950. A lot of significant factors began to happen thereafter. It was not the surfacing of these conflicts that could not be resolved between a union and an industry. Enter 1950 and the onset of the Korean War. The United Nations, led by the United States, had begun to intervene in Korea in an effort to repel an invasion by communist-led North Korea, of course, and fight for democracy. Truman felt compelled to act and act swiftly when the unions and the railroad could not resolve their disputes, since much of America's economic and defense infrastructure was almost solely dependent upon the smooth functioning of the railroads. Again, remember, this is early 1950s. This is prior to so-called luxury jet travel, okay, which was in its initial phases or just getting started to begin with, and the massive interstate highway system that would come later. A lot of the country, quite frankly, were solely dependent on the railroad industry. So with these factors, Truman felt a strike by railroad workers would cause considerable hardship to Americans during very trying times. So on August 25th of 1950, which of course, say it with me, was the focus of the trivia question, President Truman placed the nation's railroads under the control of the United States Army. He did what was known as nationalize the railroad industry. That's what it's referred to, taking control, and in doing so stated, quote, "Government seizure of the railroads is imperative to protect American citizens, as well as essential to the national defense and security of the nation." Presidents are allowed to do this. Truman's intervention in seize of the railroad industry displayed the strength of the executive branch, especially during that time, and especially so that notion was especially so because we had just entered into the Korean War. However, Truman's approach would be viewed as antagonistic in nature overall on a subsequent basis, when he would later, within the very same year and in similar fashion, take control of the steel industry when they would go on strike and could not resolve their disputes. Overall, Truman's capacity to nationalize over unions during this very trying time would make him very unpopular, especially in the press, which condemned him, really drug him through the mud and raked him over the coals. There were some pretty harsh comparisons to Truman used by the press during that time. So a couple of cool geek factoids about this whole occurrence during 1950. This was not the first time we had done this. Remember your high school history classes, I'm fond of saying, the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 was the country's first major rail strike, and it witnessed the first general strike in the nation's history, which spawned violence and halted the country's commerce at the time. All similar factors to this, with the exception of the fact that we were in war. Presidents who have used presidential intervention as a method similar to Truman and following Truman. I thought this was interesting. See how many of these you remember, folks. 1962, Kennedy, the U.S. steel industry. Throughout the mid-1960s, we had Johnson and the railroad industry, plumbers, firemen, garbage workers. Johnson was a busy character for busting up unions or trying to negotiate, trying to get them to work together. 1970s, jump to the 70s. Nixon, railroad workers. He also had an involvement with dock workers. Jump to President Carter, coal workers, and again the railroad industry. Remember Ronald Reagan and air traffic controllers. He fired over 11,000 of him. That was also the focus of a trivia question earlier this year. That's what I'm talking about. And see if you remember this. Reagan and Clinton intervened in baseball strikes. Remember, there was 1 year, or both of them respectively, where we didn't have a World Series. So those are some examples that were kind of uncovered when you kind of peel back the layers of this particular occurrence and you look into history and so forth. Really neat stuff, folks, to research. Check it out if you get a chance. All right, folks, happy Friday. Let's get it going with a brand new trivia question for August 26th. See if you can get this, folks. There's a lot of clues in the wording of this trivia question. Pay attention. On this day in 1895, the first major hydroelectric power plant in the world was built at this state park location, which would later be able to send electric power up to 400 miles away to New York City. Have a good Friday, folks. A fantastic Friday. Let's do it right now. Thanks for all you guys do. Appreciate it. Love you guys. Get to the weekend. Peace out. Let's go.